Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well. I have one heck of a bonus upload for you. Before we get into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please share this video and leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's bonus, shall we? All right, really quick, guys. So while I was recording the intro, the channel's mascot, many of you have seen him on the live stream. His name is Tigger, and he is a Maine Coon cat. Decided to come into the studio while I was recording and bite my leg just a second ago, just to say, hey, I'm in here, and then sneeze while I was recording. So if you hear that little sneeze, that was him. Let's get into it. Today's first encounter. January of this year was a very dark place for me emotionally. My husband and I grew estranged after the loss of our 6-year-old youngest son. For about 2 months, December and January, we were apart as he spiraled with substance abuse to numb his pain. He left town and stayed with his father across the state. When he came back to town, we wanted to see each other. He checked into a hotel in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I drove out to see him at around 7 p.m. when our then 2-year-old son fell asleep. We were staying with my mother during this time, and she offered to watch the little one. I stayed for a few hours. It was very emotional, to say the least. We wanted to reconcile and overcome the tragedy we had faced. At around 12 p.m.-ish, I knew I would have to get back to my mother's house in case my son woke up. It was pitch black outside. My GPS led me down a narrow road. I was eager to get home, and although very overwhelmed, wide awake due to the adrenaline of seeing my husband for the first time after our separation, crossed over a stream and started going slightly up a hill. In the middle of the road was a set of bright green eyes. I instantly slowed down because there are a ton of deer in the area. If there is one deer, there is usually more. I slowly creeped up the hill in my minivan, scanning for more eyes, and the figure in the middle of the road scuttled to the right-hand side, then stayed perfectly still and in position. Scuttled is the only way to describe the way it moved, honestly. To the right is a big open field with some trees and a brush that line the perimeter alongside the road. The thing was along the brush, almost like it was trying to blend in. It was on both its hands and feet. Its arms were unnaturally long and bent at an angle. Its eyes were that reflective green the entire time I drove past, with no pupils. I don't think it looked at me directly after it positioned itself in the brush. It stared past me with a black hole for a mouth, not gaping, but wide open. Since I slowed down quite a bit to prevent from me hitting this thing, I got a good look at it. About 8-ish feet tall on all fours, crouched, skin looked like orange bark, like it was trying to camouflage along the trees, but was too orangish/tan. And as I crept closer, I saw what it was: fleshy, like gross, orangey, swollen blood flesh. The nose is what stood out to me mostly. It was long and pointed. I'd almost compare it to Pinocchio before he would tell a lie, all the same orangey flesh color. I hope that makes sense. I really don't know how else to describe it. It happened in seconds. I thought I saw a deer. I slowed down as I passed it, and it was not a deer. I kept driving. Almost immediately after I laid my eyes on it, I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Such a horrific sense of dread consumed me, and it almost helped me continue to act rational and drive the hell away from there. I then heard a knocking and a huge thud come from the inside of my van, like someone had jumped from the back but into the inside. All of my windows were up because it was obviously winter, so there was no logical way something could have happened to appear as I drove. All of the hair stood on the back of my neck, and every instinct I had was telling me to keep staring straight ahead. Don't look back behind. Don't look in the rearview mirror. Don't say a freaking word. So I didn't. I struggled to breathe. I had a huge lump in my throat as I sped down the road. So beyond scared, with every fiber of my being on overdrive telling me to get the hell away from there. The second I turned off of that road, that feeling of someone being in the car with me was gone. I looked back and nothing was there. I kept driving and called my husband in hysterics, half sobbing, half laughing out of shock and saying, I'm not scared, I'd kick its ass, because I had a feeling it thrived off of fear. It was one of the most terrifying things I had ever experienced in my life. Months have passed since then. My husband and I have since reconciled and have even got stronger since our fallout. We have tried to look more into it, but every time we start to do some research, I get this sick feeling in my stomach, almost like my body's warning me to leave it be. I tried to ignore it and forget about it for the longest time. My husband and I bought a piece of property locally. As we looked at properties, we stayed away from anything big and open with a field because it reminded me too much of that thing. We purchased a heavily wooded lot about 30 miles away from where this experience took place. We are having a home built custom for our 3-year-old son's needs. The little guy has cerebral palsy. We moved onto the property next week in a camper to oversee construction. But now I'm worried. What if there's another encounter, and I have my little boy with me this time? What if something bad happens and I lose him? I've already lost one son. If anything happened to the oldest, I don't know what I would do. We began finally really digging into what that thing was. We looked into the thing itself based off its appearance and the location I saw it at. Turns out that field I saw it at is part of a memorial park called House Neck Park. There's a lot of Native American history tied into that area, so we dug a little more into the local lore. We came across the term skinwalker. That was probably the closest thing we found that resembled the creature. That's what we've been referring to it as. But there are a few things about my encounter and its appearance that still makes me hesitate to believe with 100% certainty that that's what it was. Now, I really don't think what she saw was a skinwalker. As a matter of fact, I know she didn't, unless there was a Navajo shaman in Pennsylvania. But because I was so fascinated, I decided to just kind of check out the area quickly. Crazy enough, I found something. Something in that area. Called the G Wuggle. Let's do some Clinton County trivia quick. Who was the founder of both Lock Haven and Clinton County? Jerry Church. What date was it founded? June 21st, 1839. What's the official monster of Clinton County? What's that? You didn't know we had an official monster? Well, yeah, we do, since July of 2011. It's called the G Wuggle. It's described as sort of a wolf-like creature that walks upright, with bird claws instead of hands and horse hooves instead of feet. Stories of the G Wuggle date back to at least the 1870s, when an old woman up in Keating Township, Belconifer, told them to her grandson, George Roan. George grew up to write down the stories for Keystone Folklore Quarterly, and described it decades later, and campaigned for the G Wuggle to be named the official monster. In old stories, the G Wuggle was conjured by witches. Yes, there are witches involved as well. If one of the settlers in the area did something to offend the witch, which was apparently pretty easy, they would cast a spell and create or summon the G Wuggle. The G Wuggle would stalk the area, frighten cows, sabotaging crops, and generally making a nuisance of itself. There was hope, however. A local man named Isaac Gaines, known as Hill Ike, was available to contract the G Wuggle. Hill Ike, who was actually a real local man, would cast his own spell and figure out the identity of the offending witch. Then he would go and burn down her cabin or otherwise cause some distraction, and the G Wuggle trouble would end. Hill Ike is buried in a cemetery near Clinton/Clearfield County line. There's also stories of him battling ghosts and curses, and sometimes consulting with a friendly local ghost called the Swamp Angel. G Wuggles have been spotted long after the legend began, and a lot closer to Lock Haven. A newspaper article on February 4th of 1909 was headlined, "Young Man Frightened. Thinks he was about to be attacked by the G Wuggle." Harry Bay, a local deliveryman, was heading to work early in the morning before the sun was up. As he walked along Lake Haven's Vesper Street, he heard sounds on the roof of the building. Looking up, he saw something furry on top of the building, and heard sounds as if it was doing damage up there. Bay was so frightened, he ran as far as Main Street to get away. To this day, reports of upright canines are heard from people driving in remote areas of the country. Many of these seem to come from northwestern end of the county, very near the grave of Hill Ike. Could this be the G Wuggles lurking around the final resting place of their old opponent? Crazy enough, I did talk about Hill Ike about 2 to 3 years ago. Because yes, he did supposedly battle Dogman-like creatures and witches back in the day. And his gravestone is real, and it's pretty crazy. I'm contemplating on doing another upload about it because it was actually very interesting. And who knows, maybe it was the East Coast's first cryptid hunter. All I remember is it was pretty damn interesting. But I just found it kind of weird that I went looking for this blight this woman has in her brain and found this. Now, what's interesting about this is this could be just an early sighting of a Dogman. You know, if you look, it resembles a werewolf. It resembles a Dogman. It resembles what we call werewolf to this day. You know, like Dogman, whatever. But the thing is yes, you can argue the bird-like claws or talons. Well, you know, excuse me, if you think about it, in the 1800s, 1900s, early 1900s, you see something with claws, and you know, folklore back then was you kind of combined all of these creepy animals together to make one big, just really creepy thing. Maybe it was mistaken identity for the claws. Maybe they were really just its hands, the clawed, like, you know, who knows. But the hoof feet kind of gets me. Maybe that was misidentification too. Maybe this G Wuggle, excuse me, all along has been a Dogman. Maybe these witches in the Pennsylvania mountains or woods have been able to control them. Who knows? A lot of strange shit happened back in the day. Well, there's strange shit happening now that we can't really grasp. I found it really interesting that I looked it up. I was like, what the heck did this lady see? And then boop, this pops up. Kick ass. Today's second encounter. I grew up in the countryside of northern Indiana. This encounter happened when I was in 7th grade. We had a trash pile where we burned our garbage, and my mom had me take a bag out at around 10 p.m. I grew up in the woods around our house, and I wasn't afraid of the dark, so I didn't have a reason to be hallucinating or seeing shapes in the dark as kids do. I had never been afraid of the dark up until this point. I took the bag out, walked a short distance down the road to the trash pile. I was about to throw the garbage on top before I saw something standing about a car lengths away from the pile. Whatever this thing was, it towered over me, and I was pretty tall for someone around my age, being 13. This thing loomed over me. It had to be easily 10 feet tall, maybe more. We just stared at each other for a long minute. That's when I noticed it had dark midnight fur and bright, red, almost glowing eyes. I was frozen. Then it just turned and stomped back into the woods. It was very fast, and to me, the weight of this thing was making the floor of the woods vibrate. I screamed and dropped the bag in the road and ran as fast as I could back to the house. My mother saw that I was acting like I was in shock. I couldn't breathe. My mom was tuned out most of the time, being too depressed to even notice her children. My state of mind obviously disturbed her enough that she came and checked on me. I told her what happened, and she let me stay home from school for the rest of the week. Fast forward 5 years later. I started living with my aunt because the situation with my depressed mom got real bad and I had to move. One night my aunt had some friends of the family over, and I had heard a conversation that piqued my interest. My aunt was telling our family friend about seeing a pair of red glowing eyes staring in at her from the 10-foot high window in the trailer. One of those weird small ones that are toward the top of the bathroom. The same height that I saw that tall man-beast thing. I told her what happened to me, and her jaw just dropped. This was probably the most satisfying thing that has ever happened to me. Hearing from another person made my experience feel authentic and made me think that I was not crazy anymore. Today's third encounter. Ohio, 1977, August at approximately 10:30 on a clear night, southern Ohio. The nearest town would have been Midford in Scioto County. My grandmother was on the phone with a church friend, and my grandfather was out doing some related to school. I stepped out onto the back porch to get some guitar strings I had left in the car parked in the driveway. As soon as I stepped outside, I noticed a very foul smell like a skunk and rotten meat. Very strange. I'd never smelled anything like that before. I reached down and picked up the broken axe handle and started tapping it on the concrete as I walked. I wasn't interested in running into a skunk. I proceeded to the rear of the car, started to pull the keys out of my pocket and put them into the lock. But I heard a rattling sound that seemed to be coming from everywhere. I stopped and looked around, and there was complete silence. That struck me as odd because the pond beyond our house normally was raging with crickets and frogs, but it was silent now. I again went for the lock and again heard that rattling sound. I could clearly see but saw nothing. Then I realized I was being watched from behind. As I turned, the rattling sound returned, and there was 30 to 40 feet away this huge creature at least 8 feet tall. No neck, very long arms, and reddish black in color. It was covered from head to toe with hair which was longer than its forearms, and around where its neck should have been. Its face was hairless around its mouth, eyes, and nose, and it had a heavy brow. I couldn't see its eye color. Its arms swung forward and hit the barbed wire fence it was standing behind. That was the rattling sound. I have no idea how long I stood there in shock. I do know I hit the kitchen table on the way into the house. My grandma said I was making much too much noise as I ran down the hall to my room, not knowing what had just happened. My gun cabinet was so locked, so I began breaking the glass as my grandma came in telling me to calm down. I told her there was a monster outside. She said, "It's one of your friends playing a joke. If you take that gun out, I'll call the sheriff." I told her to call the sheriff, the game warden, and the state police. I then zipped past her carrying the loaded .30-30, and she was right behind me. I ran out, and the thing was gone. She asked me, "Where is this monster, and what on earth is that smell?" I kept telling her it was right there. After saying that a couple times, we both heard something going through the trees beside the house back toward the fence. Then the entire fence line shook, and there it was, running through the field onto the hill, which was void of trees until you got to the top. My gun was on it, but it was amazingly fast. I think I was saying it runs like a man. Don't know if I was saying it aloud or not, but something in my head said, "What if it is a man?" But it was way too big, and no man would run like that up the hill. I lowered my gun as it got to the top, and it turned and screamed at us. It started out low-pitched, then went very high, maybe 5 to 10 seconds long, then walked into the woods. Scared the bejesuses out of my grandmother. I told very few people, and they just laughed. I always told myself one day I will bring whatever it is in. Then everyone will see who's nuts. Poor Grandma. I'm sure back in those days it was seen elsewhere in the area. Now, my second encounter happened in early of November of 2009 in the Smith River area, Northern California. I got a call from a ranger friend of mine whom I had met many times in the area. We'll call him Scott. Scott asked if I wanted to go a hike with him, looking for illegal bear hunters. We crossed the Patrick Creek heading south. All I heard for an hour and 45 minutes was, "There's no such thing as Sasquatch, just in my imagination." We came upon a ridge that had an open area to see the valley below. I had my binoculars scanning below, and there below us were 3 creatures about a quarter of a mile away in the grassy area by the edge of the cliff. I had to laugh. Scott asked, "What's so funny?" I pointed and said, "Right down there is my imagination." He looked, and his words were, "Holy shit, you gotta be kidding me." Stood erect facing us, as if he could see us. You could see that the female had breasts, and was doing something in the grass with a much smaller creature. The big guy stood still. We watched them for 10 minutes or so. Then the big guy, my rough guess was about 8 feet, did something with his right hand. They all stood, got in a single line, turned and went into the tree line along the cliff, which was above them. They were gone. Scott was very nervous and actually in a panic, as in his 15 years of service as a ranger he had never seen anything like that. I insisted we go down there, and we did, but it took us a while to get to their location. We could see where they had been, and he was now very paranoid. We followed their trail, and they went along the cliff, and after about 45 minutes, went up the cliff. Straight up the cliff. We did the same. And trust me, Scott did not want to. It took about 45 minutes to get to the top, and we tracked them west along the edge of the cliff. Then, to my surprise, they went straight back down, left us sitting there with miles between us. Scott even said how smart that was, which made him even more paranoid. Well, it was getting dark, and we had no night gear with us. I wasn't going to talk him into going further anyhow, so we headed back. He never said a word on the 4-mile track back to the river, but was very scared. We said our goodbyes, and I called him the next day, and he turned in his resignation and now lives in Santa Barbara. All right, folks, I hope you all enjoyed this bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. Your support is honestly what makes this channel continue to grow and go, and what makes it special. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.